Hello, everybody. How you doing? Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Luck, and this episode is the first in a multi-part series of loosely affiliated topics. But the major primary theme is America. I like to keep things topical around here. Since America is turning, or has turned, 250, really in the grand scheme of things, compared to many other countries on this planet, I would say 250 years old. That makes America 2.5 years old, really. A baby. And ask any parent, and most likely tell you that terrible twos. They are the worst time in a parent's life, no doubt. One of. So, I don't know. But America is a bastard child. We are just running free all through Never Never Land. Never going to grow up. Which is, a good and bad thing. I was just talking to my buddy, Wellesley. Perhaps some of you remember him from previous episodes. He's up in Washington, the lucky bastard. Meanwhile, I'm back here in Texas, where it's triple-digit weather every day for the last month now. Nice to know that going outside will give you a heat stroke, especially if I'm walking to the store for cigarettes. That's double unhealthy. No, we were talking about Israel Keys, the serial killer, and how he stashed all these different caches of loot and serial killing supplies. I assume weaponry and, chloroform, whatever you put in a serial killer kit. Sooner or later, a Sasquatch is going to find one, and, well, if you thought they were dangerous before, wait till a Sasquatch gets hold of a serial killing kit. Anyways, that's enough. That's enough preamble. This episode, like I said, it's the start of a series with the unofficial through line being America. And now this first part in this series, we're going to delve into what I like to term primordial America. The America that existed before, especially white folks, but, all these different people, the Chinese, the Northlanders from Europe, the Vikings, and potentially, I guess they'd be various Pacific Islanders, indigenous peoples from the Indian Ocean area, etc., the Pacific, who are all said to have beat Columbus here. In fact, this is a topic that'll come up multiple times throughout this series. I don't know if it does today, but I don't think it does. But Columbia, this is a personification, a goddess personification of America that derives its name from Christopher Columbia. So, it's one of those weird parts of the pagan undercurrent, the American secular religion that pervades all of our, it pervades and fuels the entire sort of mythopoetic, symbolism heavy American, or what is that movie called? National Treasure. It's all the National Treasure of strictly American deep fried version of the Da Vinci Code. That kind of stuff. That's a little later down the road, but yeah. Where was I going with this? Primordial America, sorry, yeah. I wanted to essentially paint a picture of this land that Americans call home as a Lovecraftian hellscape that existed before all these different peoples landed here. Even before the, I think it's the Clovis peoples who came over on the land bridge. I may have that wrong. It's in my notes somewhere. But what kind of nightmare world existed right under our feet before the mythology behind America sprung up left and right. Of course, I'm talking about the land of giants, the land of nightmare rituals, the land of cannibal holocausts. TM, copyright. I scoured as much as I could to find specifically, scientifically backed up horrors, and took a little bit of artistic liberty. But most of this stuff that I'm going to present this episode is attested according to the most recent scientific findings, archaeology, anthropology, etc. So I wanted to ground this in as much reality as possible, but still give it that good old-fashioned Lovecraftian slime shine to it. So, anywho, without further ado, let's jump into an exploration of primordial America. Let's go! Americans have long been lied to about this land that they call home. Textbooks tell us that European sails appeared on the eastern horizon. The American continent was a vast and empty wilderness, a pristine, untouched sanctuary of forests and plains waiting to be discovered, as if the land itself had just been holding its breath for 10,000 years, awaiting the arrival of civilization. This is nothing but a candy-coated, comforting delusion, a necessary colonial fiction, because the truth that empirical science is now only beginning to uncover, the truth encoded in peer-reviewed fossil record, geological core samples, and the oldest oral traditions of the First Nations, is that America was never empty. It was never wild. It was instead a haunted wasteland, a graveyard of collapsed worlds and forgotten empires. What follows isn't speculative folklore, myth, or fantasy. It's a rigorous dossier grounded strictly in hard science, anthropology, deep-time paleontology, and forensic archaeology. Every site mentioned has a coordinate. Every anomaly is backed by stratigraphy, radiocarbon dating, and peer-reviewed excavation logs. We don't need to invent monsters. The clinical, verified reality of what existed on this continent, what crawled, slithered, built, sacrificed, and died across this land during the violent climatic shifts of the Pleistocene and Holocene, is horrifying enough on its own merits. We'll strip away the sanitized modern interpretations, the watered-down museum placards, the dull, polite drone of the docents, the cautious academic hand-waving, and look directly into the empirical abyss of primordial America, a realm of documented megafaunal horrors, cataclysmic geological upheavals, and apex entities that would have made Lovecraft himself piss his pants. Not for their cosmic mystery, but because they actually existed. Prepare yourselves. The peer-reviewed research isn't a bedtime story. The accursed ground beneath your feet is older, darker, and more thoroughly documented than you know. And the data doesn't lie. Maybe except for the Dogman part, but we'll burn that bridge when we get there. We begin in the Ohio River Valley. Standing at the edge of a cliff in Adams County, Ohio, looking down upon the Great Serpent Mound, a massive 1,348-foot-long earthen effigy of a winding serpent slithering across the landscape, its jaws open as if preparing to swallow an egg-shaped earthwork. The structure is ancient, built by hands that understood astronomy with a precision that rivals modern engineering. But the serpent isn't merely sitting on the land, it's anchored to an ancient wound. Directly beneath the effigy lies the Serpent Mound Disturbance, a massive 4-mile-wide impact crater, where a meteorite or crypto explosion shattered the bedrock hundreds of millions of years ago. The ancient builders didn't choose this site randomly. They built their greatest cosmic symbol directly on top of a physical tear in the Earth's fabric, a place where the planet's magnetic shield was literally broken open by an unknown outer space invader. Magnetometers brought to the site show severe, localized magnetic anomalies where compasses fail and gravitational baselines fluctuate erratically. The serpent's undulations align with solar solstices and equinoxes. Its head points towards the summer solstice sunset. This isn't art. This is a machine, a receiver, a monument built to harness or perhaps ward against the distorted energies bleeding out from the crater below. Local Shawnee traditions and broader Algonquian mythologies tell us what the archaeologist can't: that the serpent represents an ancient entity of immense power. The great horned serpent, known as Mishipeshu or Uktina, is a primordial subterranean deity locked in eternal war with the thunderbirds, the sky gods. It's a being that predates human arrival, a creature of the deep places that surface only to either feed or make war. We travel west now to Collinsville, Illinois. Here stands Cahokia. At its peak around 1100 CE, it was a sprawling metropolis, larger than contemporary London, anchored to Monk's Mound, a massive 100-foot-tall earthen pyramid containing roughly 22 million cubic feet of soil, moved by hand, basket by basket, by a civilization that vanished so completely that their descendants barely remember their names. To the west of Monk's Mound sits Woodhenge, a series of massive timber circles of red cedar posts arranged to track astronomical alignments and solar cycles with surgical precision. This was a city of the sky, built to mirror the cosmos, but it was also a city of the underworld. By 1350 CE, Cahokia was completely abandoned. Archaeology points to ecological depletion or political collapse, but the local oral histories speak of the site as a place of profound spiritual taboo, of severe ritual activity that eventually became too dangerous, too saturated with death, and was left behind to the wild elements. The people fled not from famine, but from something that had awakened in the earth beneath their feet. Before the modern colonial myths of lost white races, quote-unquote, concepts thoroughly debunked by real archaeological data showing indigenous authorship of every mound and monument, there existed in First Nations oral histories independent, consistent accounts of ancient, non-human, or giant precursors who roamed the land long before the ancestors of today's tribes arrived. The Choctaw speak of the Nahulo, a race of giant, cannibalistic humanoids who inhabited the deep forests and cave systems of the American South. The Choctaw fought a bitter war against them until they were eventually driven underground or eradicated. These weren't simply large men. They were a different order of being, primitive and hungry, possessing a hunger that couldn't be satiated by normal food. In the Great Basin of Nevada, Paiute oral tradition recounts a long conflict with the Siteka, a legendary tribe of red-haired, man-eating giants who lived in Lovelock Cave. Early 20th century excavations uncovered massive tool reed artifacts and larger-than-average skeletons. Modern anthropology notes that soil conditions can discolor hair to a reddish hue, but the legends of a hostile, distinct group remains a stark fixture of the region's lore, a memory of genocide encoded in a story of a war against giants that ended with the giants' extinction. But the giants weren't the only precursors. Throughout the 19th century, during the excavation of Adena and Hopewell mounds, early historical archives and newspapers, including reports documented by the Smithsonian Institution's Bureau of Ethnology, routinely recorded skeletons of immense proportions. Excavators frequently documented remains measuring between 7 to 8.5 feet tall, featuring massive craniums and, in rare instances, double rows of teeth. These aren't the bones of tall humans. They suggest a monstrous archaic hominin variant that interbred with early humans, a brutal, powerful race that dominated the primeval forests before being driven into extinction by the First Nations. Who built the mounds? The answer whispered in the oldest stories is, not us. Not humans, as we understand them today, but something older. Something that walked with stiff legs and carried stone clubs the size of tree trunks. The deep wilderness of the Americas has always been viewed in folklore as home to primordial forces that predate human arrival. These entities represent the untamable, chaotic hunger of the earth itself. In the Northeast, the Wabanaki and Algonquin peoples speak of the Chenu, also known as the Giwakwa, primordial ice giants born from human hearts that have turned to stone through greed or isolation. They represent a cosmic ancient hunger that dwells in the frozen, deep northern interior. To encounter a Chinnu is to encounter the winter itself made flesh, a being that must consume human flesh to warm its frozen core, and that leaves footprints in the snow which steam with an unnatural heat. The Wampanoag tell of Pukwudgies, inhumanoid gray-skinned, knee-high entities that possess elemental magic, shape-shifting abilities, and a deep, implacable hostility toward humanity. They're said to haunt sacred woods and ancient stone formations, particularly in the region known as the Bridgewater Triangle in southeastern Massachusetts. They shoot poisoned arrows. They push people off cliffs. They're not fairies in the European sense. They're something older and angrier. The original inhabitants of the forest who never agreed to share the land with humans. In the southeast, the Cherokee warned of the Anaskahai, the underground bears. These are ancient, sapient spiritual entities that reside beneath the high peaks of the Great Smoky Mountains, existing in a parallel world older than humanity. They're not bears as we know them. They're beings that chose the form of bears, or perhaps bears that achieved a terrible enlightenment, dwelling in caves that led not into the earth, but into other dimensions and other times. I can't help but be reminded of the Dennis Martin disappearance, and how some of the descriptions claim that he was being carried off by a bear-like creature in the Great Smoky Mountains. But I digress. Then there's the Mini-Watu, the Missouri River flesh eaters. In Lakota and Dakota traditions, the deep mud-churned waters were home to terrifying subaquatic humanoids covered in dark, slick skin, possessing a single fiery eye in the center of their foreheads and a jagged saw-like horn running down their spine. They generate localized vortexes to capsize canoes, dragging victims down into the riverbed to consume their flesh. Merely catching a glimpse of one swimming beneath the surface was said to induce violent, irreversible madness or physical deformities. These aren't spirits, they're physical. They leave tracks, break branches, and drown children. And they've been here far longer than we have. Certain zones across the American continent have been designated as places of high danger or profound spiritual strangeness since antiquity. These aren't merely haunted houses or spooky forests. These are the geographic anomalies where the fabric of reality wears thin. The Black Mountains of North Carolina, where Cherokee lore historically warned against settling deep within certain peaks of the southern Appalachians, viewing them as the domain of Judaculla, an ancient giant sky being who controlled the weather and left his claw marks etched into a massive soapstone boulder. Judaculla rock still bears these marks, deep inexplicable grooves that no natural process can adequately explain. The mountain is his throne, the storms are his breath, and to climb too high is to trespass into his domain. The Great Dismal Swamp, straddling Virginia and North Carolina. Long before it became a refuge for escaped enslaved people, the indigenous populations of the coastal mid-Atlantic treated this vast, choking peat bog with deep reverence and sheer dread. It was viewed as a shifting liminal space where the veil between the physical world and the ancient spirit realm was dangerously thin. The water is black, not from tannin, but from its depth. The trees grow sideways. Time moves differently there. People go in and never come out. Consider the geology. The Appalachian mountain chain is one of the oldest on Earth, dating back over 480 million years. They existed before the Atlantic Ocean even formed. Their deeply eroded ridges have witnessed the rise and fall of countless evolutionary epochs. They're a fitting geographic anchor for tales of primordial terrors because they are primordial. They remember when the world was truly primordial. In the southwest, the Hopi point to the Sipapu in the Grand Canyon, a natural mineral spring near the confluence of the Colorado and Little Colorado rivers. This isn't merely a sacred site. In Hopi cosmology, this yellow, bubbling mineral dome is the absolute physical exit point from the third world. It's where humanity crawled out of the dark, leaving behind the ruined, non-human civilizations of the deep earth. The surrounding area was kept entirely wild and unpopulated. It was a place of supreme existential dread, a physical scar on the landscape where the ceiling of the underworld was broken open, leaking the raw, toxic energies of an ancient world into our current reality. Now we descend from legend into documented fact. The archaeological record of ancient America contains verified, deeply unsettling evidence of extreme, systematic violence, body processing, and cannibalism that completely shattered early assumptions of peaceful indigenous societies. At Sacred Ridge, Colorado, dating back to roughly 800 CE, archaeologists discovered the meticulously processed remains of at least 33 bodies. These weren't combat deaths. The bones showed extensive evidence of systemic torture, blunt force trauma to the ankles and feet to prevent escape, decapitation, defleshing, and the systematic crushing of bones to extract marrow. The bodies were processed en masse, cooked, and then discarded into pit structures, which were subsequently burned down. The extreme focus on destroying the skeletal structure suggests a ritualistic effort to utterly erase an entire genetic lineage or clan from existence. At Cowboy Wash, another ancestral Puebloan site dating back to the mid-1150s CE, researchers found unburied human remains showing the precise tool marks of skinning and defleshing, pot polish from being boiled in ceramic vessels, and fractured long bones. The smoking gun was discovered in a cold hearth, a coprolite, fossilized human feces. Sorry, but it's historically accurate. You learn a lot from shit. It was left behind by the perpetrators. Analysis tested positive for human myoglobin, a muscle protein found only in human tissue. The site was abandoned in a sudden, frantic hurry immediately after this feast, leaving all tools and vessels behind to collect dust for 1,000 years. These weren't acts of starvation cannibalism. These were ritualistic events. The consumption of human flesh was the point, not a last resort. Something was being invoked. Something was being fed. At Cahokia, Mount 72 serves as the charnel house of their civilization. Excavations revealed a literal production line of ritual slaughter dating back to 1030 CE. The focal point is a high-status male buried on a platform of 10,000 marine shell disc beads arranged in the shape of a massive falcon, the Birdman. Surrounding him were mass graves. One pit contained the meticulously arranged bodies of 53 young women, aged 15 to 30, laid out in two distinct layers. Forensic bone analysis proves that they were strangled to death simultaneously. Isotopic testing showed they were malnourished outsiders, likely tribute or captives brought from far away to be systematically executed. Another pit containing 39 men and women who met a spectacularly violent end, clubbed, decapitated, fractured, and thrown haphazardly over the edge of a sand-lined pit. Most chillingly, several skeletons were found with their fingers locked in a vertical clawing position, frozen mid-dig in the sand. They were buried alive, while still breathing, beneath the weight of the corpses above them. This wasn't mere warfare. This was agriculture of the flesh, the cultivation of death to ensure cosmic renewal. To understand the true scale of primordial American horror, we must abandon linear history. The indigenous cosmologies of the Southwest explicitly describe America not as a new land, but as a graveyard of failed worlds. Hopi cosmology states that humanity is currently living in the fourth world, Tuwakachi. The previous three worlds were completely destroyed by cosmic forces because their inhabitants became corrupted. The first world, Tokpala, was destroyed by fire, a rain of meteors and volcanoes. The only survivors were righteous humans who were brought underground by the ant people, the Anusinam, a sapient, subterranean insectoid race that sheltered humans in deep, labyrinthian caves. The second world, Tokpa, was destroyed when the Earth was knocked off its axis, spinning into cosmic darkness and freezing solid into a global ice age. Again, the survivors lived underground with the insectoids. These aren't creation myths in the simplistic sense. They're geological records encoded in story. They describe a planet that's been through multiple extinction events, that's hosted multiple intelligent species, and that's seen humanity reduced to refugees living in the cracks of the earth while older, non-human civilizations dominated the surface. This mirrors the Silurian hypothesis, the scientific question of whether a technologically advanced, non-human civilization could have existed millions of years ago and left zero traceable geological footprints. In America, the answer, whispered in the oldest of traditions, is yes. The ant people, the lizard people, precursors, they're still down there in the deep places, waiting for the fourth world to end. In 1934, a mining engineer named G. Warren Shufeldt claimed to have used radio X-ray technology to map an elaborate gold-lined underground city beneath Los Angeles, which he connected to indigenous legends of a prehistoric lizard people that retreated underground 5,000 years ago to escape a cosmic firestorm. The mainstream dismisses Shufeldt as a crank, but the Hopi know the Sipapu, the Cherokee knew the Nunnehe, a completely separate, non-human race that lived inside the mountains and cavernous complexes of the southeast, invisible to human eyes unless they chose to manifest, possessing reality-warping abilities, known to lure lost humans down into the darkness where they would slowly change into something non-human. Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, the world's longest known cave system, with over 420 miles of mapped passageways, contains evidence of prehistoric mining over 2 miles deep into total darkness. Archaeologists have found ancient slippers, torches, and geometric petroglyphs deep inside the system. Who were they mining for? What were they mining? The limestone or something else? Something that required human hands to extract from the deep places. If we look at genetics through a mythos lens, the American continent houses genuine biological mysteries, ghost lineages encoded in the very blood of specific populations. In recent decades, geneticists sequencing the DNA of ancient and modern indigenous populations stumbled upon a baffling anomaly. Certain indigenous tribes in the Amazon basin, such as the Surui and Caritinha, carry a distinct genetic signature known as Population Y. This component is entirely absent in other Native American groups. Population Y doesn't originate from Siberia or East Asia, where the primary migrations crossed the Bering Land Bridge. Instead, it shares a common ancestor with the Australasian populations of Papua New Guinea, the Andaman Islands, and indigenous Australians. This implies that an incredibly ancient, completely distinct, and highly enigmatic group of humans crossed the vast Pacific, or bypassed the ice sheets via an unknown coastal route, tens of thousands of years ago, contributing their DNA to the deep American gene pool before completely vanishing as a distinct culture. They left behind nothing but a genetic phantom. They whisper in the blood of their descendants. But who were they? Where did they go? Why did they disappear so completely that even their bones have never been found? They are the true ghosts of America, not spirits, but genetic precursors who arrived, contributed to the human story, and were then erased by time, climate, or something that didn't want them on this continent. Across the continent, the oldest stories don't feature human-like gods. They feature titanic, chimeric monstrosities that ruled the land when it was still soft and unformed. The Octana of the Cherokee, a massive primordial horned serpent with scales that glittered like cold diamonds and a blazing crest called the Olunsuti embedded in its forehead. Looking directly at it caused instant madness, blindness, and death. It resides in deep pools and mountain passes, waiting for the foolish to approach the water's edge. The Piasa of the Illini and the Mississippian cultures, a horrific aerial predator described as having the face of a bearded man, the horns of a deer, glowing red eyes, a body covered in green and black scales, and a tail so long it wrapped around its entire frame. It's a primordial sky terror that fed exclusively on human flesh. The famous Piasa bird petroglyph on the bluffs of the Mississippi River isn't a decorative work. It's a warning sign. A notice posted at the edge of a territory claimed by something that ate humans. The Yawaho of the southeastern and Siouan people, an invisible, formless entity of absolute crushing dread. It's described not as an animal or a spirit, but as an atmospheric presence that settles over certain valleys, driving anyone who spends the night there into violent, suicidal mania. its depression made physical, and despair given agency. And then there's the little people. In 1932, two gold miners blasting in the San Pedro Mountains of Wyoming blew open a sealed hidden rock chamber. Inside, they found a tiny, naturally mummified humanoid sitting cross-legged on a ledge. The Pedro Mountain mummy was only 14 inches tall, possessed a flattened skull, a full set of teeth, and a heavy, dark skin. Modern radiological testing suggests it was an anencephalic infant suffering from a rare genetic condition. But the discovery shocked the public because it perfectly matched Shoshone and Crow folklore. Then there's the Namaragar, an aggressive prehistoric race of subhuman primitives who lived in the rocky crevices of the mountains, said to use tiny bows tipped with violent neurotoxins, who would ritually execute members of their own kind with a blow to the head when they became too old or too sick to travel. These aren't fairies. They're not cute. They're a distinct hominin species, possibly surviving into historical times. Definitely hostile, definitely predatory, and possibly still living in the unexplored cave systems of the Rocky Mountains. Yet the line separating a physical flesh and blood hominin from a metaphysical intrusion is far thinner than modern science cares to admit. Across the Midwestern river valleys and timberlands of North America, modern encounters with bipedal, wolf-like monstrosities, colloquially branded as Dogman or the Beast of Bray Road, consistently refuse to remain bound by standard zoological rules. As pioneering Fortean investigator Linda S. Godfrey documented during her decades of field research in Wisconsin and Michigan, these apex manifestations repeatedly cluster around specific, highly anomalous geographic coordinates, namely the prehistoric earthworks, effigy mounds, and sacred mortuary sites left behind by the Hopewell, Mississippian, and Adena cultures. Yet to imagine that the Dogman is a modern invention, a 19th century lumberjack tall tale, or an artifact of 1980s radio pop culture is to willfully ignore the deepest stratigraphy of North American oral history. Centuries before European trappers pushed into the interior waterways of the continent, indigenous oral traditions recorded the presence of upright, predatory canine entities that existed outside the natural balance of the wilderness. In the Great Lakes Basin, long before the region was carved into Michigan and Wisconsin, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi preserved accounts of the Rougarou, a word later corrupted through French-Canadian fur trader contact into loup-garou. But unlike the European werewolf, which was traditionally viewed as a human cursed by witchcraft or a pact with the devil, the indigenous Rougarou or Maiko entities were understood to be primordial. They were non-human, anti-cosmic predators that existed before the current age of man. They were entities that inhabited the liminal shadow spaces of the deeper timber and river valleys along the Manistee, operating under laws entirely alien to human morality. Further west among the Lakota Sioux, whispers persisted of the Shunkawarakan, an unclassifiable hyena-like beast whose name literally translates to carries off dogs. It was described not as a common wolf, but as an asymmetrical, heavy-shouldered monstrosity that moved with an unnatural bipedal or semi-bipedal gait, raiding encampments under cover of pitch darkness and slipping back into the Badlands without leaving standard biological tracks. In these ancient traditions, these entities were never treated as ordinary prey or game animals. They were categorized alongside the Wendigo and the Chindi, non-Euclidean corruptions of the natural world. They were living manifestations of environmental hostility, cosmic indifference, and primordial hunger. In the Lovecraftian architecture of North America's deep past, these upright wolf beasts weren't evolving alongside humanity. They were the leftover caretakers of an older, darker Earth. Sentinels guarding the threshold where human civilization ends and the ancient world still bleeds through. The foundational accounts of this phenomena, such as Mark Shackleman's chilling 1936 confrontation on the grounds of St. Coletta in Jefferson, Wisconsin, don't begin with a stray hunter in the deep woods. They begin with a night watchman stumbling upon a massive, dark-furred, upright entity kneeling atop an ancient Hopewell burial mound, actively raking its long, clawed fingers into the sacred soil. When confronted, the entity didn't flee like a wild predator. It stood over 6 feet tall on 2 legs, fixed its glowing eyes on the observer, and spoke a guttural, terrifyingly unhuman phrase, Gadara, a direct phonetic echo of ancient tomb-dwelling demons. Depending on the spelling, this may translate to a Sanskrit word, which in itself translates to all is dust. This reoccurring spatial correlation birthed the burial mound theory, the hypothesis that these bipedal canine entities aren't unclassified biological animals awaiting discovery by mainstream zoology, but rather threshold guardians, metaphysical sentinels, or genius loci, explicitly bound to sacred indigenous earthworks. In this framework, the entity is a living territorial boundary. It's an ancient guardian summoned or bound by prehistoric ritual to protect ancestral remains, spiritual portals, and tribal limits from desecration. When modern highways cut through sacred corridors, or when agricultural plows and suburban expansion breach the perimeter of ancestral mounds, the ancient lock breaks. The sentinel awakens. Its sudden aggressive appearances, the terrifying vehicle attacks along Bray Road, the phantom stalking along rail lines, the sudden paralyzing waves of dread aura that overwhelm witnesses before a single shadow is even seen, aren't the hunting behaviors of a starving predator. They're territorial warnings. They're violent, psychogeographical immune responses generated by the land itself to drive human intruders away from the forgotten sacred ritual landscapes. To understand how ancient cultures negotiated with, bound, or kept these primordial entities at bay, one must look beyond physical walls and weaponized stone. They didn't fight these forces with muscle alone. They constructed an invisible perceptual apparatus, a hidden ritual infrastructure forged through volatile botany and dark spiritual tradecraft. To perceive the old gods, ancient sorcerers utilized highly specific botanical keys, some of which are now lost to time or carry terrifying modern mysteries. Across the American Southeast, elite clans used the black drink, a highly concentrated brew made from Lex vomitoria, yum, and yaupon holly. Boiled into a dark, caffeinated, and toxic froth, it induced violent ritualistic vomiting and sweating, which was viewed as a physical purging of human weakness before entering the presence of sacred objects. Analysis of organic residues in ceremonial beaker pottery found at Cahokia discovered traces of theobromine and caffeine, proving that the elites were consuming this substance in vast quantities. It wasn't pleasant, it was a necessity. In the deep canyons of the West, the ancestral Puebloans and California tribes utilized Datura wrightii, Jimson weed, or toloache. Datura isn't a classical psychedelic, it's a deliriant. It contains scopolamine and atropine, which induce absolute waking delirium, terrifying, vivid hallucinations, often involving giant insects or predatory birds, total memory loss, and severe hyperthermia. In the Pinwheel Cave in California, archaeologists discovered 400-year-old chewed quids of Datura wedged into the ceiling rock, directly beneath cave paintings of shifting geometric spirals, proving that the terrifying volatile chemistry of the plant was explicitly used to map the visual architecture of the spirit world. These weren't recreational drugs. These were tools for tearing holes in reality, for allowing the human mind to perceive what normally remains invisible, the true shape of the entities that share this continent with us. In the deep northeast, Algonquian cosmology speaks of twin creators, Glooskap, the force of balance and order, and Malsumis, the force of inherent blind malice. Malsumis is a blind, subterranean cosmic entity that sought to destroy creation simply because it was alien to his own primordial nature. While Glooskap retreated to the horizons, Malsumis was cast down into the earth. In hidden sorceress traditions, practitioners would look to contact this buried blind god to unleash natural disasters, disease, and cognitive madness upon rival tribes. It's a direct thematic mirror to a sleeping great old one trapped beneath the crust, waiting for the stars to align so it can awaken and destroy. And then there's the Skinwalker, the Yi-Naudlushi of the Navajo. While the concept is widely known in popular culture, the source of their power is deeply rooted in cosmic dread. A Skinwalker belongs to an esoteric cult that completely inverts natural law. To gain their power, an adept must commit the ultimate cultural taboo. typically the murder of a close relative or loved one. This act completely severs their connection to the holy people and binds them to the chindi, the toxic residue of everything dark, chaotic, and malignant left behind when a person dies. It's an evolutionary parasite. The Navajo view certain ancient abandoned ruins like the Chacoan pit houses not with historical pride, but as intensely radioactive hotspots of chindi energy, harboring a spiritual plague that dates back to prehistoric eras. We return now to the geology, to the electromagnetic reality of this continent that the ancients understood intuitively and that we have forgotten. Deep within the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina sits Brown Mountain, a low-ridge black mountain that sits directly over the Linville Gorge fault line. For centuries, witnesses have recorded silent, glowing spheres of light, varying in color from ghostly white to blood red and pale blue, rising directly out of the mountain's dense forest, hovering over the ridges, splitting into smaller balls and rocketing into the sky. In 1982, a local resident touched one at an overlook. Witnesses testified it felt like sticking a finger into a high-voltage socket. The mountain is a highly mineralized mass, packed with quartz and mica. When the deep tectonic plates along the fault line shift, the immense pressure exerts physical force on the crystalline rocks. This creates a colossal piezoelectric circuit, ionizing the atmosphere above the mountain and igniting balls of self-luminous free-floating plasma. Cherokee oral tradition tracks this nightmare zone back to at least 1200 CE. According to a legend, a massive catastrophic battle was fought at the foot of Brown Mountain between the Cherokee and Catawba nations. The lights were seen immediately afterward. In the esoteric framing of the lore, the glowing orbs aren't merely spirits, but the physical unspent trauma of mass death events bound to the jagged rock by the Earth's natural electrical current. In West Texas, between the tiny town of Marfa and the stark Chinati Mountains, lies a flat, unpopulated basin that hosts a terrifyingly active plasma anomaly. Large basketball-sized orbs of light dance across the desert horizon. They hover, merge together, split into fractions, and occasionally sprint towards observers at terrifying speeds before vanishing into the scrub. The Chinati Mountains are the remnants of an immense prehistoric volcanic caldera. The ground is a patchwork of basaltic rock and vast underground veins of quartz. The extreme temperature fluctuations of the high desert create intense thermal stresses on the fractured quartz-rich earth, triggering localized electrostatic discharges and glowing subterranean gas ignitions that rise above the plain. Long before early cattle drivers mistook them for Apache campfires, the nomadic Lipan and Mescalero Apache strictly monitored these lights. In older guarded Apache accounts, the lights were called stars that had fallen to earth. They were viewed as the eyes of a primordial, unformed entity that walked the desert waste before humans were created. Sentinels guarding a desolate, forbidden gateway into the interior of the earth. Modern New Age culture has romanticized Sedona's vortexes, but if you look past the tourist fluff and examine the raw geology, it matches the classic definition of an accursed, hypercharged landscape. The red sandstone rocks of Sedona sit on a massive geological matrix intensely saturated with iron oxide, or hematite, and wedged directly against a deep basement layer of sheared quartz granite. Hematite is highly magnetic. Quartz is intensely piezoelectric. When tectonic pressure hits the region, the massive mineral sandwich turns the canyons into a giant natural electromagnetic amplifier. The magnetic field lines twist and spiral through the gaps in the red rock cliffs, creating intense, localized geomagnetic distortions that can affect human brainwave states and temporal lobe stability. The ancient Sinagua culture, who built the cliff dwellings at Montezuma Castle and later the Yavapai Apache, treated the inner red canyons with immense caution. They strictly refused to live within the inner canyon boundaries. The rock arches and twisted juniper trees, which physically grow in bizarre, spiraling corkscrew patterns due to the electromagnetic stress, were viewed as highly volatile, sacred ground. To sleep there was to invite the entities to shred your mind through terrifying, reality-warping dreams. These aren't supernatural phenomena. They're natural phenomena that the ancients recognized and respected. They built their most sacred sites, their mounds, their stone circles, their medicine wheels, at these nodes of electromagnetic intensity, not because they were pleasant places, but because they were thin places. Places where the veil could be torn, where the old gods could be contacted, appeased, or warded against. We now must examine the darkest cosmic astrotheology documented in North America, the Skiri Pawnee Morning Star Ceremony. No other culture developed an astronomical theology so absolute, so intricate, and so deeply apocalyptic. In Skiri theology, the supreme creator is Tirawa, the one above. Tirawa is not a personal god who listens to individual human prayers. He's a distant, unreadable cosmic architect who operates entirely through the movements of the stars, planets, and constellations. Humans are utterly subject to the mechanical cycles of the night sky. The creation of the cosmos was driven by a violent celestial courtship. The morning star, associated with the planet Mars, was the fierce red warrior god of the east. The evening star, associated with the planet Venus, was the dark, unyielding goddess of the west who held dominion over fertility, darkness, and the garden of creation. She fiercely resisted the morning star. According to the mythos, Morning Star had to wage a brutal cosmic war, throwing a fireball to defeat a massive serpent and 4 terrifying elemental beasts guarding the directions of the western sky to finally force a union with Evening Star. Their first child, a human girl, descended to Earth, populating the world. The Skiri believed that the universe didn't possess infinite energy. The cosmos was a closed system that was constantly dying, drying up, and winding down. To ensure that the sun would continue to rise, that the crops would continue to grow, and the buffalo would continue to return, human beings had to physically reenact the cosmic violence that birthed them. Occurring only when a Skiri warrior had a vision of the morning star demanding an offering, coinciding with Mars appearing exceptionally bright in the morning sky or the sighting of a comet. The warrior would track down a young female captive from an enemy tribe. The captive girl was treated with immense deceptive reverence for months, fed the finest food, and kept entirely ignorant of her imminent fate. She was viewed no longer as a human, but as the physical vessel or avatar of the evening star. Before dawn on the 5th day of the ritual, outside the village, a massive wooden scaffold was erected. The upright beams symbolized night and day. The crossbars represented the sky and the 4 cardinal directions. At the exact microsecond the morning star crested in the eastern horizon, the girl was stripped, tied to the scaffold, and branded under her arms and groin with firebrands. Her captor then stepped forward and drove an arrow straight through her heart. The high priest immediately made an incision over her chest with a stone flint knife. He smeared his face with her blood, letting the remainder drip onto a dried buffalo heart and tongue, and into a sand pit lined with feathers below. Every male in the village, down to infants held by their fathers, would then shoot arrows into the body to hasten her transformation. Her body was taken down and laid face down, allowing her blood to completely soak the prairie soil, while her soul was believed to rocket back into the sky to re-energize the morning star. This wasn't barbarism. This was maintenance, a necessary sacrifice to keep the cosmic machinery running. What makes the Pawnee star lore uniquely mythos-oriented is its explicit, bleak eschatology. The old priest openly taught that the world had a definitive expiration date dictated by the sky. According to oral traditions recorded by ethnographers, the Pawnee believed that the North Star, Polaris, was the supreme cosmic commander, while the South Star, the land of the dead, was its executioner. Priests warned that when the end of all things approached, the signs would manifest in the sky. The moon would turn deep bruised red, and the South Star would slowly creep higher and higher out of its dark southern domain. Eventually, the North Star would vanish from its fixed position, and the South Star would aggressively climb into the center of the heavens, seizing control of the earth. At that final hour, the stars would physically fall to the earth like a rain of fire. The sky would collapse, and humanity would instantly be wiped out, leaving the planet to return to the cold, silent darkness of the old gods who ruled before the dawn. We must now look at the objects that don't fit, the archaeological anomalies that suggest timelines we aren't prepared to accept. The Cerruti Mastodon site in San Diego, California, discovered in 1992 during highway construction, is a site that contains the bones of a prehistoric mastodon that have been systematically broken and fractured by heavy, blunt percussion instruments alongside stone anvils and hammerstones. Uranium series dating securely placed the site at 130,000 years old. Anatomically modern humans didn't leave Africa in large numbers until roughly 70 to 60,000 years ago. So who or what was using heavy stone tools to break apart megafauna in Southern California 130,000 years ago? The site points to a completely unknown, highly adaptive hominin lineage. Perhaps Neanderthals, Denisovans, or an entirely unnamed precursor species thriving in American eons before the first Native Americans arrived. Mystery Hill, also known as America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire, a 30-acre complex of massive stone chambers, megalithic walls, and standing stone alignments that match astronomical cycles. At the center sits a colossal 4.5-ton flat stone slab carved with deep, encircling channels designed to drain fluids. Alternative researchers call it a sacrificial altar, noting that beneath the slab is a hidden speaking tube chamber, the oracle chamber, where a priest or an entity could speak from underground, making their voice appear to boom out from the stone itself. Carbon dating of charcoal retrieved from the stone chambers yielded dates as far back as 2000 BCE, long before European settlement. The Rockwall Enigma, here in Texas. In 1851, settlers digging a well uncovered a massive subterranean stone wall that completely encircles a modern-day county. The structure is composed of perfectly squared, dark ironstone blocks laid out in neat, tightly fitted subterranean courses. Geologists insist the wall is a natural phenomenon, a series of clastic dikes where sand and mineral stone filled cracks in clay beds millions of years ago. However, early excavators documented clear structural details, uniform masonry steps, arched entryways, and primitive square-shaped portholes. If it is man-made, it implies a sprawling cyclopean fortress city was buried under the Texas soil across a geological timescale. Dighton Rock in Massachusetts, a 40-ton glacial boulder that set in the Taunton River, completely covered in a chaotic interlocking web of deeply carved petroglyphs, geometric lines, humanoid figures, and strange archaic writing. No one has ever successfully deciphered the rock. Hypotheses range from Phoenicians, Vikings, and Portuguese explorers to indigenous tribes. But the sheer density of the carvings looks less like an inscription and more like a desperate centuries-long ledger of geometric symbols left by successive groups attempting to ward off something in the river or contain an anomalous, localized geographic tear. The Barrier Canyon petroglyphs in Utah, dating back thousands of years before the rise of the ancestral Puebloans. The walls of Utah's remote canyons are painted with the Holy Ghost panel, towering 8-foot-tall, featureless, hollow-eyed humanoids painted in dark, blood-red ochre. They have no arms or legs. They resemble shimmering spectral phantoms or cosmic entities hovering above the canyon floor. There are no depictions of hunting, farming, or domestic life, only these silent alien shapes staring out across the desert waste, capturing a profound primordial awe that feels deeply, uncomfortably non-human. We return again to the waters. In the deepest lore of the indigenous peoples of North America, lakes and rivers aren't merely bodies of water. They're gateways to the court of the old gods, inhabited by physical, non-human entities. The Miniwatu are not the only water dwellers. The Kalupalik of Inuit folklore, subaquatic, green-skinned humanoids with long webbed claws and a bloated pouch on their back, live beneath the sea ice and emit a low, vibrating hum. They don't hunt for food, but steal human children, dragging them into the crushing sub-zero depths of the ocean floor to put them in a state of permanent unnatural hibernation, to feed off of their vital energy over centuries. The Pukwudgies, again, haunt the Hockomock Swamp at the heart of the Bridgewater Triangle, a 200-square-mile zone of concentrated high strangeness in southeastern Massachusetts. The name Hockomock translates directly to the abode of Hobomok. Hobomok was not a devil in the Christian sense, but the Wampanoag deity of darkness, death, chaos, and destructive magic, the inversion of the benevolent creator Kiatan. Hobomok was invoked by Pawas, shamans, to inflict disease on enemies, command physical forces, and interpret nightmarish visions. The Wampanoag strictly avoided entering the deep swamp at night, declaring it inherently cursed. The land itself is a massive glacial footprint, a choking mire of quicksand and black water where anomalous lights, Wampanoag death fires, giant, unidentifiable tracks, and sudden, intense feelings of cognitive dread have been reported for millennia. These aren't ghost stories. These are environmental warnings. The swamp is dangerous because it's a portal. The water is black because it's deep. And something lives in the depths that's been there since before the glaciers retreated. We arrive now at the final synthesis. The terrible truth that unifies all these threads, the mounds, the giants, the entities, the sacrifices, the genetic ghosts, and the electromagnetic anomalies. Ancient America wasn't an empty wilderness waiting to be settled. It was a managed landscape, a containment zone, a prison built by unknown hands or by the land itself to hold things that should not exist in the waking world. The mound builders, the Adena, the Hopewell, the Mississippians, were not primitive tribes slowly developing agriculture. They were the inheritors of a terrible responsibility, the last custodians of a containment infrastructure built by precursors they could barely understand. They built their geometric earthworks not as temples to the sun, but as circuit diagrams etched into the soil to manage the flow of electromagnetic energy across the continent. They placed their dead in the mounds not as burials, but as offerings to feed the things that slept beneath. They practiced ritual cannibalism not from hunger, but from necessity, to absorb the power of their enemies, or to satisfy the hunger of the old gods so that those gods would not rise and consume everything else. They knew about the population-wide ghosts. They knew about the ant people in the caverns. They knew about the Yukina in the rivers and the Chenu in the ice. And they built their entire civilization around the goal of keeping these entities contained, appeased, and asleep. When Cahokia fell, when the entire urban center was abandoned in the span of a generation, it wasn't because of drought or political collapse. It was because the containment failed. Something woke up in Mound 72. Something came through the wood hinge alignments when the stars were right, or wrong. And the people fled, leaving behind their tools, their pottery, and their dead, because to stay was to become food for entities that had been waiting since before the first human walked upright. The European colonists who arrived in the 16th and 17th centuries didn't discover a new world. They stumbled into a haunted wasteland where the containment infrastructure was already crumbling. They built their cities on top of ancient mound complexes, unknowingly sleeping atop the burial pits of sacrificed virgins and the tunnel systems of the Namaragar. They dismissed the indigenous warnings about the Pukwudgies and the Skinwalkers as superstition, even as their own people began to disappear in the woods, driven mad by the Yawaho or dragged under the ice by the Kalupalik. The lights at Brown Mountain and Marfa aren't ghosts. They're the immune system of the planet, antibodies made of plasma that swarm to sites of tectonic stress where the veil is thin. The Serpent Mound is not a monument, it's a seal, a plug in the magnetic fabric of the earth, keeping something beneath the crater from rising. The genetic anomalies in Amazonian tribes, the population Y signal, are not evidence of a lost migration. They're evidence of interbreeding, of a time when humans and the precursors made treaties in the dark. When the ant people emerged from the Sipapu and required human genetic material to sustain their dying species, trading knowledge of architecture and astronomy for the right to harvest DNA from the tribes of the Amazon. The population Y signal is not a ghost lineage, it's a receipt. A signature of contact signed in blood and bone between Homo sapiens and something that walked upright long before we did. Something that came not from Africa, but from the depths of the earth itself. The Cerruti Mastodon site is not an anomaly. It's evidence of the custodians, the unknown hominins who were here before us, who built the first containment structures 130,000 years ago. who weren't human, but who understood that America was special somehow, that this continent was a pressure cooker, that the geology here, ancient, fractured, piezoelectrically alive, was conducive to the formation of tears in reality. They came here to guard the prison. They built the first stone walls at Rockwall, not as a fortress for themselves, but as a barrier to keep the lizard people contained in their subterranean cities. They failed. Or they were replaced. Or they were eaten. And now here we are, living atop the ruins, ignoring the warnings encoded in the old stories. We've built our highways through the Bridgewater Triangle. We've flooded the Great Dismal Swamp with drainage ditches, disrupting the natural barriers that kept the liminal spaces contained. We've excavated Cahokia and placed the bones of the sacrificed virgins in climate-controlled museum cases, severing them from the magnetic fields that kept the entity in Mound 72 sedated. We've dismissed the skinwalker as superstition, even as our livestock are found exsanguinated in fields where the grass grows in spirals. We've laughed at the Nukkalevi while our children drown in lakes that have no bottom in the places where the old maps warned not to build. The Pawnee knew. The old priest warned the South Star would rise, that the sky would collapse, that the stars would fall like rain. They understood that the universe is a closed system winding down, and that the morning star requires feeding. We've stopped the sacrifices, we've broken the circuit, and now the containment is failing. You can see it in the magnetic anomalies that disrupt navigation systems over the Serpent Mound. You can see it in the increasing frequency of Marfa light sightings, the orbs growing larger, moving faster, approaching closer to observers before vanishing. You can see it in the genetic studies that keep finding population Y in unexpected places, the signal spreading, the ancient contract activating in the blood of descendants who don't know what they're becoming. You can see it in the cave systems, Mammoth Cave, La Chuguila, the undiscovered depths beneath the Grand Canyon, where explorers report hearing voices that speak in languages that predate Indo-European, that predate human speech entirely. The mounds are not monuments, they're valves. Pressure release mechanisms built by people who understood that the earth here is alive in ways we refuse to comprehend. When we excavate them, when we remove the bones and the artifacts, we're not studying history. We're dismantling the containment infrastructure. We're unplugging the machines that kept the old gods asleep. And they are awakening. The Uktena are surfacing in the Mississippi River, their diamond scales flashing in the moonlight, their Ulunsuti crests causing boaters to go blind and mad before they drown. The Chenu are walking down from the Arctic as the ice melts, their frozen hearts thawing just enough to remember the taste of human flesh. The Piazza has been photographed in the skies above Illinois, not as a bird, but as an atmospheric distortion that causes entire neighborhoods to suffer simultaneous psychotic breaks. The Oahu has settled over the San Rafael swell and has not moved in 3 years. The suicide rate in that region has increased by 400%, and the survivors report dreams of hollow-eyed giants standing on canyon rims just waiting. This isn't climate change, and this isn't pollution. This is the end of the fourth world, and the Hopi knew. The ant people offered shelter in the first world and the second world, but they will not do it again. There will be no fifth world. When the southern star reaches the center of the heavens and the north star vanishes, when the blue star Kachina crashes to Earth in a cataclysmic firestorm, the sky will not just collapse, it will open. And what comes through will not be aliens. It will not be angels. It will be the precursors, the original owners of the continent, returning from the caverns and the depths and the magnetic fault lines where they've been sleeping, waiting for the custodians to fail. We're the custodians now. And we definitely haven't passed. Standing now at the edge of the Grand Canyon, look down into the Sipapu, that yellow-crusted travertine dome where the mineral-saturated water boils up from the thousands of feet below. Feel the electromagnetic distortion in your teeth. Listen to the hum that isn't the wind but the vibration of the earth itself, the piezoelectric scream of quartz under pressure. This is the true face of America. Not the amber waves of grain, not the purple mountain's majesty, but a haunted wasteland built atop a prison whose walls are cracking. A continent where the oldest mountains in the world have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations that were not human, where the caves extended for hundreds of miles into darkness that has never seen sunlight, where the genetic ghosts of Population Y are waking up in the blood of their descendants, and where the mounds are not burial sites but seals keeping the giants underground, where the rivers are inhabited by flesh-eating cyclopes, and where the very rocks generate balls of plasma that hunt the living. The First Nations tried to warn us. They put up signs in the only language they had, story. They told us about the skinwalkers and the Chenu and the Nahulo. They warned us not to dig in the mounds, not to enter the swamps at night, not to look directly at the lights on Brown Mountain, not to build cities on the fault lines, but we didn't listen. We called them superstitious, foolish, primitive. We called their stories myths. We called their warnings folklore. And now the containment is failing. Now the sacrifices have stopped. Now the stars are moving into position. And now the South Star climbs. You live in America. You're standing on accursed ground. Soil beneath your feet has absorbed the blood of 130,000 years of ritual slaughter, cannibalism, and genocide against giants, of wars against the precursors. It remembers it's alive, and it's hungry. The next time you see a light hovering over a ridge at night, don't approach it. The next time you hear a voice calling from a cave mouth, don't enter. The next time you find bones in your garden that seem too large to be a deer, don't call the university. Call a medicine man. Call a shaman. Pray to whatever gods you have left, because the old gods are returning, and they don't recognize your claim to this land. You're not the first to walk here, and you will not be the last. You may be the last to walk here as a free human, unhunted, unharvested, unbound for the sacrifice. The mounds are watching, the caves are breathing, the serpent is uncoiling, and the stars are falling. Welcome to Primordial America. Welcome to the end of the fourth world. Welcome to the feast. Epilogue. Just a few years after all this, a few in the grand cosmic sense of things, let's say several centuries, somewhere in Europe, the idea will catch fire that this strange land to the west is something magical, something that's been waiting just for us, the Europeans, to come and take a look at. Something called the New Atlantis. And that's where we'll pick back up in the next episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I went a little old-timey radio and melodramatic in the Lovecraftian sense, but it was a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be here for the next episode, where we're going to get into something I talked about in the previous episode, but essentially it's going to be the occult founding fathers. All of the strange, Masonic, pseudo-Masonic, Rosicrucian, and mystery origins of this country. Goes into some pretty weird places. Also watch Life, Larry, and The Pursuit of Unhappiness if you haven't seen it. Good stuff. Anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. This has been Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Luck, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.
Oh, molasses!